Hello and welcome back to the Argyle HR Leadership Forum. My name is Vicki Lynn Brunskill with Argyle. It's great to have everyone joining us today. Just a couple of notes before I turn things over to our panel moderator for this excellent session. And to ask questions throughout this session and all sessions, simply type into the Q&A chat. We will address your questions at the end of the session. And now, without further delay, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Frida Green, Senior Talent Acquisition Partner, Equity, Diversity, and Belonging at RTI International. We are so excited to have Frida and our panelists with us for a panel discussion titled Building a Diverse and Inclusive Culture with Talent Acquisition Strategies. Welcome, Frida, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Vicki Lynn. Hi, everyone. So excited to be here and to moderate today's session. So I'm going to kick it over to the panel members. I'll let you all introduce yourselves briefly, and then we'll jump right into the session.
I'm Karen Weatherholt. I'm currently lead global talent at Illumina, which is a biotech company based here in San Diego. And prior to that, I worked for the Disney company for about 20 years across HR and talent functions, and that led me around the world. And so glad to be here with you today. Vijay?
Hi, everybody. My name is Vijay Pendakur. I just finished up my time as the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer at Dropbox. Before that, I was the Chief Diversity Officer at VMware and then Zynga. And prior to leading DEI functions in the corporate space, I had a long career as a university administrator and academic, leading DEI and student success functions at universities around the country. I will pass the mic over to Bernita.
Thank you. Happy Tuesday, everyone. My name is Bernita Dillard, and I am from the West Coast. So shout out to everyone in the room who is representing the great state of California. My background is in diversity talent acquisition. So currently I work for Expedia Group. Prior to Expedia Group, I led diversity talent acquisition for DoorDash. Before that, I was at Facebook, Google. I've worked in government affairs. I've worked for private firms, all centered around economic opportunity and or diversity talent acquisition. So I've been in every sector doing the same thing and got to see this from many different viewpoints. So excited to share my background, my expertise in this space. And I'll hand it back to you, Frida.
Thank you, Bernita. Thank you, panel. So excited to be here with you all today. So I'm going to go ahead and pose our first question. And Bernita, I'd love to get your take on this question. What are the challenges facing Chief Human Resource Officers and hiring leaders in terms of diversity and inclusion, and how can these challenges be overcome?
That's a great question. I feel like no one has the exact answer to that particular question, but there are three things that really stand out to me. The first one that comes to mind is conscious and unconscious bias. I think a lot of times we kind of focus in on the unconscious bias without actually calling a spade and saying that there is actually conscious bias that is happening in our interview process. When we're reviewing resumes, when we're looking at names, when people find people that they have like bias, like, oh, this person is coming through the interview process, they're just like me, I want to hire them. But actually there may be a value add to having a different perspective than what you have. So that's one. Two, I hate to say this, but I think that we lack innovation to some degree when we want to just kind of keep doing the same thing that we've always done and not wanting to really bring in innovative and creative solutions to how we hire, how we look at talent, how we approach that. And finally, I'll say culture is probably another problem, because if you're not treating the people right that you currently have, that brand will continue on in the future. It will continue on with their peers in the industry. People will hear what they're saying about the folks who work there. So you got to treat people right, because then they'll stay, you'll retain them. They'll say great things about you. They'll tell their friends, and then you kind of create this brand of excellence, right? So I would say that those three things are some of the biggest problems, and three ways that you can approach that is one, investing in the talent that you currently have, right? How do I get this person from a manager to a senior manager to an executive? How do I provide an environment of safety, an environment where people can thrive in this organization? And then also really building that brand within the communities that they want to serve. So really investing in the people, current people and future people. Second, I would say is education and training. I know people kind of lean in there, but it's so critical because you do have people where it is unconscious bias and they need to understand, how do I recognize this? How do I challenge this? How do I change this? Right? And you give them the tools that they need in their toolbox so that they become advocates for other people. They become advocates and allies, right? And then third, I would say you have to implement goals and actually hold folks accountable. If things are not tied to success, they're not going to do it. So that is critical, probably one of the most important things. You need to have accountability at the highest levels of leadership and also down to your individual contributors, making sure that they understand that this is a part of how we are going to evaluate your success on this team. Did you do the thing that we asked you to do? So that's how I would answer that, Frida.
That is wonderful. Those were some great nuggets, Bernita. So I appreciate that. So just kind of recapping, we talked about culture, we talked about education, and we talked about accountability. Those are excellent nuggets for our audience here. So Vijay, I'm coming to you next. What are some effective and innovative ways that you have seen HR leaders apply data and technology to really improve inclusive and equitable hiring?
Yeah, hiring, right? That's sort of the through line for our conversation today. First, I just want to shout out Bernita for bringing that energy and bringing the passion and enthusiasm. I'm loving it and couldn't agree more. So plus 1,000 to what Bernita just shared to get us going. So for me, this area around data and technology is one of the most exciting places to really lean in. Every organization has limited calories, right? So there's only so much energy, budget, human energy to put towards transforming your practice. That's the reality of almost any workplace, right? And so you have to make smart choices about where you put your calories. And organizations that follow Bernita's prescription and make aspirations, year over year commitments to increasing the diversity of their workforce, then have to think about, okay, well, how do we build a quarter over quarter roadmap to get there? And the calories need to go into the data and technology. You can't. So many organizations commit to some sort of real nebulous, abstract goals and then have no way to get there. So a mental model I offer to start, and then let's dig in a tiny bit. A mental model that I use when consulting and coaching organizations is to think about data and technology as necessary investments if you want to move towards meritocratic hiring. And what I mean by that is you have to accept that your status quo is not meritocratic hiring. If you think that right now you have perfectly clean signal between human talent and who's in your organization, you're lying to yourself, right? And that's me being spicy, but it's true. The hiring practices are really, really poor signal to noise ratio, unless you're constantly using data and technology to insert an equity lens that reduces friction for groups that are underserved by these processes. So what do I mean by that? Every slice of your funnel using this mental model of data and technology as guarantors, right, of equity through the funnel process. You know, if you think about your hiring process using the 5 kind of normative steps from posting a rec to making an offer, you know, there's ways that your organization, if you want to become a data forward talent acquisition organization, your organization has so much data in your ATS, and very few orgs that I consult with are actually weaponizing that data to start to understand the future employee journey through the funnel. Your TA team can package up data and take it back to the DEI leadership, the HRBPs, the business leadership, and say, hey, look, here's our compositional mix, top of funnel for these kinds of recs that we're posting. We're seeing a disproportionate melt of these kinds of groups, veterans, people with disabilities, women, people of color. We're seeing a disproportionate melt at this stage. It's happening in our interview loop. It's not happening at the hiring manager screen. It's happening in the interview loop. So what we need to do is go through and do an equity audit and a bias bust in the interview process. And what a lot of early stage organizations find is that you don't have standardized question sets. People are asking questions that aren't actually measuring for the competencies necessary to be successful in the role. So then they're asking questions that really recenter an affinity bias, like Bernita was describing earlier. Oh, you went to Yale? I went to Yale. And you're like, yo, it ain't even about going to Yale. Why are we talking about Yale, right? So the need to put in controls, like standardized question sets, competency-based interviewing, focused interviewing, so that each person in the loop is actually testing for a clean signal against one of the core competencies involved in the role. This gives clear roles and responsibilities to your interview loop. And then another common area that I oftentimes tell early stage organizations to put calories in is in auditing scorecard data. So if you're like, wait, scorecard data, that would require having scorecards. Okay, table stakes. Let's get some scorecards, right? You got to have interviewers. Anybody who has touch on a candidate needs to be detailing extensively their notes and then offering a summary evaluation of the candidate's hireability for the role. But those scorecards, and this is where the technology comes in. If you're like, well, we're understaffed, each of my recruiters is handling 25 recs, I don't have the space for, looking at scorecard data. Great. This is where generative AI tools are actually going to unlock a level of bias and equity detection in the data that will help you move more quickly towards the flywheel of TA actually becoming an evangelist for changing practices. And so when you're thinking about the newest HR tools that actually use Gen AI to scrape scorecard data and then highlight leading and lagging indicators that you need to attend to in order to guarantee a meritocratic hiring process, that's an amazing investment of budgetary dollars. That's the kind of technology you want to scale your human effort and to move towards an inclusive and equitable hiring practice.
I love generative AI for good. That's the thing, right? That just like our TA practices today, you don't just turn it on. You have to have leaders that are thoughtful about the probing questions that we'll ask. And one of the things I'm excited about, VJ, is those interview questions. Generative AI can help us with that. But further, they can actually give us a starting point of what a good answer might look like, so that we're aligned on what does good look like. Because if you're interviewing a supervisor versus a senior executive on coaching, the answer should look a little different based on sophistication, based on experience, based on some other things. The other thing, DJ, if I can just add, I love the weaponizing of the data in our talent systems. And I have to say that there's a call out to Workday, Beamery, pick your technology. They have got to do this for us. We as TA will not be able to build that technology in-house ourselves. We are never big enough. We are never IT savvy enough. We need these providers to really lean in and say, HR technology is going to be best in class, and it is foundational to the Googles, the Amazons. Like, we know all the best in class models that we have.
That's awesome. And you also said something else in there too, was that focused testing. I really love that. So the structured and the competency-based, people have that down, but really having that person or those people on the interview panel who are focused on specific areas and really testing those out. That's great information, great insight. Karen, I'm going to pick on you a little bit more for the next question. What are the most effective ways to really accurately measure an organization's progress against belonging and inclusion hiring goals? And I want the panel to talk to me a little bit about what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah, this is a very passionate subject for me, and it's going to build on what Bernita and VJ both offered. So I think that's part of our role. We as talent acquisition have to show the progress. We have got to tell the narrative, and that comes with concerted effort, calories, as VJ was talking about it. The place that I like to start is, what's your baseline? So do you know the diversity in your field, in your industry, in the function, and in-house as a starting point? And you can get that through Talent Insights. You can get that through internal reporting. But you first need to know, for example, in STEM, in my field, for scientists, here is the benchmark of diversity by gender, by ethnicity, by age that's in the available marketplace. Here's where we are today. So first of all, are we even meeting the basics, right? And then how do we actually build sourcing strategies to begin to move the needle? Vijay, I'm right with you about we have got to measure the pipeline at every stage of the process. The thing that I would also say is you got to get your own house in order first. What I have found is I can't talk to my hiring managers about the bias or the disconnect until I can show them we are actually bringing more diverse talent to the table than the benchmarks on the outside. We have moved the needle in this case. We are doing sourcing strategies and market insights, and our talent advisors are actually advising the client on the available marketplace and what triggers they could pull to get a more diverse slate. Once you get your own house in order, then you can come to them, I think, as you were both saying, about educating them on, did you know that we're providing X number of women, or pick your diversity dimension, and they are moving through the pipeline in the same percentage until the panel interview, and they're not making it out of the panel. Can we talk about that? And just that moment of creating awareness, I think, as Bernita was saying, brings this bias to the surface, that you can have a really constructive dialogue about why is that happening? What can we do about it? Do we have diverse panel interviewers? Are we doing 2-on-1? Like, there are tactics we can do. So I think I take a very pragmatic approach to this. And I do find then my recruiters and my hiring managers, they can wrap their head around it. You know, this big thing of diversity, it's huge, it's overwhelming, it's an elephant. But if you can walk them through the model and target on the one place they can make a difference, it actually moves the needle. Going back to what Bernita was saying as well on culture, I think it's really important to understand your employee value proposition and what different talent groups, what's important to them. And it could be by function. Bioinformaticians want to know that all this math they're doing is going to have an impact. Salespeople want to know that they can close the deal. There's competition. So there's diversity in function as well. And you've got to be really clear on what your company offers and what it doesn't. And you have to be transparent about that. Otherwise, you're going to get them and not keep them. So I think there are metrics all the way through the talent lifecycle, even beyond you've now got them. Are you keeping them? Are they growing? Are they referring their friends? So that whole culture piece lays across the ecosystem, and just measure. So if you don't have an analyst on your talent acquisition team, there is a business case to get one, because it is a different skill set than your recruiters, and your corporate metric people never have time for TA. So find a head count, convert a recruiter, something so that you can get the data that you need.
That's wonderful, Karen. You have to measure what matters, and really measuring, being intentional about measuring at each stage of that recruitment funnel is really key, just to set that baseline. So that's great. Great information. Thank you for sharing that.
I just want to add 2 cents because it's a slight challenge. One, I agree with what Karen is saying, but I also would like to add that I think that 2 things can be true at the same time. So you can be measuring what's going on in your funnel, and you should be. And your learning and development team can also be training on bias too.
Absolutely. This is why, Bernita, I'm so with you. The reason I love my job is that I lead talent. It's an ecosystem.
It is an ecosystem, and everyone should have a target. Yes.
Exactly. And you also are learning things about diversity higher up through talent and succession planning. So what are you doing about taking that and putting it at the beginning? Are we looking for more people with skills or attributes? So you're right. It's an ecosystem.
Or coaching them or developing them.
Totally. So we have to become friends. If you don't own the whole ecosystem that I'm lucky to do, we have to become friends with our partners and really talk about that integration. We're absolutely spot on.
Absolutely. It's definitely an ecosystem. What is it? Buy, borrow, or develop. So you definitely have to leverage all elements of that employee life cycle for sure. This is great dialogue. So I'm going to pose this just to the panel, and whoever wants to kind of take a dip at it first, feel free. What innovative approaches have you seen applied to build a more inclusive workplace culture?
I'll get us started. I know my teammates here are going to have lots to add because it's nice being on a panel where people have the reps and the cycles doing this work, because there's endless potential answers here. I think Bernita started out at the top of the hour by saying there's no one answer. There's no silver bullet. If we had it, we would be retired, y'all, right? So there's no silver bullet. But I think that one thing that I'm thinking about, and I'm particularly thinking about an audience question that came in around the notion that, you know, you can be really committed to inclusive hiring. You can have done a lot of hard work on using data to ensure really clean signal through the funnel stages. But what if you're not getting the compositional mix in top of funnel? And I think that to red thread, you know, this notion of your employee experience actually is critical to your talent acquisition ecosystem, right? So oftentimes the employee experience team, or the people who contribute all that on that end, and the talent acquisition team, they're not talking to each other. And it's mind-boggling, but how many organizations have we been in where these are ships in the night, right? And it's like, no, you bring them in and then we take care of them. And it's like, it doesn't actually work like that. The best sell to diverse audiences to come work at your company is a full spectrum EVP and a full spectrum employee value proposition. So what I mean by that is the traditional three legs of the stool, where you've got comp and ben, you've got, you know, your workforce arc, so compensation and benefits. I'm sorry, let me not use as much trade terms, right? So you've got, you know, compensation and benefits, you've got the career progression that you can offer, and you've got the job posting that you have right now. And that's like a very, very narrow, old school 20th century EVP. But when you add in the other pieces, and when you think about full spectrum EVP, it's important to understand the data we have on millennials and Gen Z in the workforce. So the millennial workforce and the Gen Z workforce are compositionally more diverse than the Gen X and baby boomer workforce. That's just demography. That's not me opining. Those are the facts. And Gen Z is the most diverse workforce that we have access to. So these, you know, kind of going after in terms of your talent brand and talent attraction calories, going after millennials and Gen Z is a diversity strategy, because these are the segments that have more diversity. But when you look at the Gallup research on the values of these generations, they want to see a full spectrum EVP, because what they're equally interested in is not just the role as it is, the career progression. Obviously, everybody needs compensation and benefits to line up, but they want to know about things like social purpose. Is this company doing good in the world, or is this company making the world a worse place? This question of social purpose did not rank as high on the workforce studies for Gen X or baby boomers when they were earlier in their careers. They want to know about, I'm going to use the term, we can come up with better language, but I'm going to say work-life balance. We all know what that means. It's really work-life tension or work-life compromise, but they want to know what the work-life compromise is of your organization and how the organization is invested in wellness, right? And so, you know, there may be folks on the call who are cringing at the thought that the younger generation is interested in these things. We can have a sidebar conversation as to what that means, but the data is you really can't argue with it. And so if you're thinking, boy, I'm not seeing the compositional mix, the diversity in top of funnel, one of the things is, how are you crafting your talent story, your employee experience story, and deploying that as full spectrum EVP in the digital watering holes, the digital gathering places, the digital campfires where Gen Z and millennial workforce members are gathering to talk about, where should I work next? There are places that over-index on younger talent in terms of gathering and talking, and your talent attraction and talent brand spend needs to be in those places. And the story you tell needs to be calibrated to the zeitgeist of the younger generations. And that can actually really help shift your top of funnel mix, so that all the work you've done to ensure clean signal through your funnel pays off. What do you all think? Karen, Bernita?
Listen, first of all, I think TA has been in marketing and sales for a long time. So I love what you're saying about that, because that's what I tell my team. Like, you can say you're in HR, but you're in marketing and sales. And what you are marketing is what is attractive about this organization and what isn't. Like, you have to be real about it. And I think, Vijay, I'm a huge fan of EVP work. I've done it several times in my career. And the thing I would say is, it's worth the investment in getting an external partner that will do it based on research. not the Kool-Aid that we think this is what we offer and this is who we are and it is fun at work and we have this. No, it's got to be based on research on what's important to them and what we offer. And it truly is insightful. I think the other thing about culture is we do engagement surveys. So again, this is the ecosystem, and we ask questions like, I feel like I belong at Illumina. I work in an environment where I can express my opinion even when it is not the opinion of others. So we have about 6 questions, and we look at it again and again and again, and we filter it by dimensions of diversity, generational, gender, et cetera. We also look at it by leader groups so that we can pinpoint bright spots and hot spots. Because to your point, if it's not coming to life in your organization, you're never going to be able to sell that. People will know. You can tell them it's amazing, but the minute they start that interview process, they're going to know that is just shenanigans. They're going to know. So you have to really have kind of truth in your journey, even when it's hard. In my last life, because I worked for Disney and parks, if you can imagine, everybody thinks of their vacation when you think about applying at Disney. They don't realize that you work nights and holidays. So that was one of the things we had to say, that, look, it's hard to work here. You are going to work holidays. And if you're not up for that, that's okay. We'd love to still have you as a guest. So it's the same in our functions today.
And I just want to add 2 cents. One, I completely agree with both of my panelists. Amazing, amazing, amazing feedback there. I will also say that people want to feel seen, heard, valued. They want to thrive just like everyone else, right? So we talked about that internal brand and reputation and how that is expensed. In addition to that, you also want to show up where people are. If you're passionate and actually want to build a relationship, you have to start with, somebody has to know your name. They need to be able to trust you, be able to trust that your EVP is accurate. They want to hear from people who work there. So they want to see people on panels. They want to see people thriving in your organization. So you do need to go to the Sisters in Sales and the Latinas in Tech and the Afro Techs and all the things that exist within the world with people within the groups that you are trying to actually attract. So I'll just add that little piece there as well.
And I think Bernita, you can do that even if you don't have jobs at the moment, because it's a long runway, right? We're building relationships, and all of us can invest in under-recognized talent. And there are a number of programs in communities here in San Diego. We have several that are investing in underrepresented minorities, first generation STEM talent. Okay, everyone on my team wants to lean in with them. So let's build a long-term relationship. They're not going to be employees for 6 years if we're lucky, but they're going to grow and spread the wealth and have more access and thrive. They need to thrive. I'm getting all excited about that.
Yes. And it's so necessary. That speaks to really building that future funnel. One thing that I'll say about one of my previous employers, Google, they did this in the most magnificent. They also have a lot of resources where they are investing. So I'll just say that. But the investment that went into high school students, college students, and they're thinking about the future of tech was just mind-blowing. And it's very much critical. And then you're building that brand early on. Now, this group of folks, now they trust you, they like you, they've been on your campus, they know who you are, they know what you do, they know your employee value proposition. They've seen people who've worked there, who've left, who've came back, boomerang back. So they have already started to build an affinity to your brand as an employer.
Yes. And if you don't have the investment, because lots of our companies are scrappy, go get with your CSR or ESG partner and understand who they are leaning into and investing in, and then get your TA organization to volunteer, to engage, to participate. There's ways to do it even without significant funding for travel and marketing.
This is great, panel. I really appreciate all of the nuggets of wisdom that you're sharing here today. Before we jump to our last question, before we get into the Q&A, I just want to kind of recap some of the themes that I heard in this little last question discussion. I really heard a lot about intentionality, authenticity, and really building those relationships for the long haul versus just the transactional component of just, you know, gathering talent. So this is great stuff. So I'm gonna pose our last question before we get into our Q&A. What is the next technology or hiring trend that you think will have the greatest effect on talent acquisition? Anyone on the panel?
Generative AI for good. For good, not for weaponizing, not for, you know, again, the thing I worry about with generative AI, I'm super excited about it. And you want to talk about access, you know, imagine talent in places that don't have access to education, but now through generative AI, they can, and they can get coaching and they can get tutorial. Anyway, I'm super excited about it. But as we began to talk, it's not on or off. Right. And so just like we have to teach our recruiters today, thoughtful decision trees and probing questions, we have to be able to do the same with generative AI. And from a talent landscape, this ability to have a thinking methodology that leads you to good judgment is the thing that I worry about for HR today, because it's no longer the policy says. It's about what's the intention of the policy? What are the 6 questions I need to ask to actually get to the right answer? Not just what questions should I ask? What questions should I ask? And nudge them along the way. Did I just drop the mic? Wow.
Yeah, no, when the question is what is the next big tech, you know, and you said Gen AI, I think that's the answer. You nailed it. There's nothing else to say. I mean, obviously there's stuff around the edges, but that's the elephant in the room, and it's transformational. And I hope that you're right that the for good piece needs to be centered in the adoption practices.
Well, that's our role, right? That's where all of us as leaders can play a role in leading generative AI for good and not accepting when it's not, to ensure we have trusted data sources, to ensure we are, you know, everyone's seen the show me a picture of the president and it's all white men over 50. Okay, well, where's the next question? Show me pictures of the president that represent the diversity of the United States. What does that bring up? Okay, wait, show me the future with a Gen Z lens on it, right? Like, so we have to be smart about it. And that's where we as leaders play a significant role, I think.
Yeah, I think for folks who are in smaller or earlier stage organizations who are saying, gosh, you know, Karen's making this profound point about the power of Gen AI and then also the need to protect against the downside. How do we even get started? Salesforce published their AI incorporation ethics online. And after looking at a number of tech organizations that have gone public, I'd put my finger on the scale and say Salesforce probably leaned most into this notion of for good and really tried to foreground human centering principles and protective or constitutional AI principles into the way that they created their rubric for the incorporation of AI into the future of work. So if you're thinking, man, I don't want to build the plane from scratch, who's already flying, this is a great place to start. So I thought I'd throw that out there as a tip for the audience.
That's
and
awesome.
I'm sure every TA company, again, Workday, Beamery, I'm not biased to those, they're coming top of mind. They're all working on the same thing. So we can all be smart about reading up on generative AI. There's plenty out there that you can find. Getting smart about what's emerging in the technology and asking these questions. Vijay, I love this, you know, human centering principles. So when your ATS comes out with their version, ask that question. Can I see your human centering? You know, what are your goalposts? What are your guiding principles? How will we measure? How are you measuring adverse impact? Show me.
That's great, Karen. Absolutely. And I think being a part of those brainstorming sessions with those technology companies, you want to pull some of us into those discussions so we can really talk about some of the issues that we have. So they're building the technology, they're the technology experts, but we are actually the ones doing the work. So I think that combination would be great. Absolutely. Bernita, anything else you want to add? I know you talked about Google and when you worked there and just all of the amazing things that they were doing from their initiatives.
And not to take away from any of the other companies that I've worked at and that I work at now that are doing great things in regards to talent acquisition, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I wouldn't say anything other than what my fellow panelists have said. Get into the technology, use the technology now before it may be a part of your ATS, before it is a part of the things that you're doing on a day-to-day basis. Like, use it now. Use ChatGPT, use any other program that's using AI, so that you're familiar, you know how to use it, and you're on top of the trends. And then just staying close to whatever is new that's coming about, I think is going to be critical in our space, especially right now.
Absolutely. So we're at Q&A time. So let's jump into some of our Q&A questions. Let's see here. What's the biggest, one of the questions that we have is, what's the biggest mistake you have seen companies make in terms of DE&I efforts?
Not investing or holding people accountable. It is a function, it is a corporate function that needs funding. So in order for you to build a relationship, you need to build a brand. In order to build a brand, you need money. You need to invest in partnerships. You need to leverage other people's brands who are trusted in these communities in order to gain access to the community. So I think what's interesting for me, people will just like throw up a job and expect for people to apply to the role. And it's like, we don't know who you are. I have no idea. So I think that that's one. And then two, of course, like, taking care of the people that you do have so that they can be advocates for the work that you're doing. So I would say that those are some of the areas that I feel like people are making mistakes.
I love those. I just add, Bernita, the thing I also see is they set these 2030 goals, 2050 goals with no action plan behind it. Well, how are you going to get there? To your point of, you have to invest. So you have to have a roadmap that again goes back to, where are we today? Where do we want to be? And then how are we going to build an action plan and invest in upcoming talent, current talent, our infrastructure, our alumni association, affinity groups like Afrotech that we were talking about before we began. Those are very expensive to participate in. So you're right, it has to come with investment.
I'll dovetail off of what Karen was saying, and I may actually attempt to speak to another audience question that I think sits at the intersection here. Karen, when you talk about 2030 goals, 2050 goals, and no plan, I was cracking up. The plan is like hope, right? Maybe we'll just reality. And in some ways, I understand that. I understand organizations are busy, it's complicated, you're constantly having to shift direction, there's new shiny objects. The C-suite is like squirrel, 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 it's hard, right? But one of the realities is that you're likely not going to drift like a glacier towards a better compositional mix, because there is actively a very organized, very well-resourced pushback happening right now. So just to the other elephant in the room, so we got generative AI coming with this massively disruptive, potentially for good, potentially Skynet, we got to work this out. On the flip side, we are living in this huge clapback against DEI right now. And it's so important to understand everything from this Bud Light Target fiasco down to the end of race-based admissions decisions in higher education, to the attacks on libraries in the state of Florida, to, there's endless data points here that really paint the picture of a coordinated, extraordinarily well-resourced, policy-driven agenda to ensure that we do not drift naturally towards the composition of organizations, companies, and schools actually reflecting the composition of our country. According to most demographic analyses, America is going to be majority not white by 2045. Unfortunately, that's not going to matter if we don't.
I think California's already there.
Yeah, and California has been there, and it actually doesn't show up in the power structure. Mm-hmm. The difference between demography and power, you can't underrate, right? And so what these organizations are doing is quickly going after the pipelines. So what happens if you make it really hard for higher education to be as diverse as our country. Well, then it makes it real hard for corporations and nonprofits and other organizations that are downstream of higher education to hire, because you make the baccalaureate pipeline more homogenous. And so I think that when we're thinking about, there was an audience question that sort of used the term Wall Street types pushing back on DEI efforts at corporations. I actually want to challenge the question. It's not just Wall Street types. This is actually the next wrinkle in a multi-century journey towards human dignity here in America. And the pushback is the same pushback at Brown v. Board in 1955. It's the same pushback against the Voting Rights Act in the 1960s. This is a group that is funded, that is trying to keep America from becoming a multicultural democracy. And I don't say that to be hyperbolic or dramatic. We just have to understand that if folks are feeling like this is uncomfortable and you want to look away, or if you think that this is just a bunch of people yelling at each other on Twitter, we're going to miss the point. And the point is that actually corporations could very quickly end up giving up on their DEI efforts. So one of the biggest mistakes, so that was a big preamble. One of the biggest mistakes I see corporations making in the DEI space, to actually answer the question now, is they're allowing some of this really spurious and false litigation to actually sunset or unplug their DEI efforts even before these cases have been litigated. So they're watching Starbucks and Coca-Cola get taken to task by ACRP. These cases likely have no basis, and a federal judge just threw the Starbucks case out 2 weeks ago, right? But if your corporation, if your organization already said, whoa, this shareholder litigation is terrifying, let's just stop doing anything bold that we're doing in this space because we don't want to get sued, well, that's general counsel's job, right? They're supposed to protect the organization from risk. But everybody else's job is to have a healthy discussion with counsel's office and to say, hang on, let's go through a Title VII review here and make sure that none of our practices are out of compliance with EEO rules and regs. And as long as we're not violating the law, we have to stay the course. And the vast majority of well thought of DEI efforts in corporate America do not violate Title VII statutes, right? That's where a lot of this chatter is baseless. But if the baseless chatter actually ends up pulling the funding and pulling the effort, then they're winning, And so I think that, of course, do a legal review, protect yourselves, but also know that I've been inside a lot of organizations and I do not see illegal practices.
Right.
So stay the course.
I think, Vijay, what's difficult is often we are not, those decisions are being made higher up in the organization. So I think there is a really robust discussion to be had internally about our intention and our intention on recruitment and retention, and what is our position on doing what's right in this space. And if you find that your company is not, don't forget that you have choice. You have choice about where you work. And I think that's really important to not forget that if the company is not aligning with your values. The other thing I would say is don't forget that we have choice in the organizations we support with our dollars and our time, like the ACLU. So it's a very weird time right now, Vijay, but I share that because I still feel like we as an individual, I have to have a little optimism moment, right? We still have action that I can take to make sure that I feel like I have some kind of control and I can somehow make a difference.
That's great. And with that, I want to end with we have 2 minutes remaining. I want to end with this question. As a hiring leader, this person wants to know where they can personally make the biggest difference to build an equitable workforce. And I think that aligns well with where you ended, Karen. So I just want to
lead by example. Lead by example. Lead by example. Give up, time or money to get that diverse talent, to, show diversity in your team, to show that you're transparent and open to ideas and create an environment where people can thrive. Just lead by example.
1000%. In addition to that, I will also add pay equity across your team. That's another thing that you actually have the power to control. That's one. Number two, I will also say Make sure you are holding not only your team members, so folks who are actually doing interviews, as well as your hiring partners, accountable to ensuring that there is an inclusive candidate slate for every role that you're hiring for. And it's great if you have referrals. It's great if you have people who worked there before who are coming back, but go to market, research, figure out, find talent, bring in people with different perspectives, and create an inclusive process. And check yourself, because if you don't have a diverse interview panel, so the folks who are actually interviewing, that's telling you something about your team. If your team is homogenous, you definitely need to check yourself and check that part of what's going on in your process. And then education, last thing, and I know that I've said this already, but you really have to educate people on how to identify bias and also how to check it, how to check bias so that people feel like they are on a team where they can thrive, where they feel safe. I'll leave this last little thing. I'll never forget, I was working at Facebook. I was in a meeting. I was the only woman in this meeting, and I was probably the most junior person in the meeting. And our chief technology officer, they were answering questions, having a discussion. He looked at me and said, "Bernita, what are your thoughts here?" I have never felt more seen in my life. He stopped everyone else from talking. If you can do that for somebody, that's an inclusive environment.
That's a great point to end on. I'm going to kick it back over to Vicki Lynn. Thank you, Bernita.
This has been such a fabulous panel discussion. I wish we could keep going. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I want to thank everyone for joining us for this session and for this event. And this session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event.